All Blacks coach Scott Robertson, folks, has given up on overseas All Blacks. It's a little bit of a change of tune from him because he seems to have been basically relentlessly pursuing currently Japan-based number 10 Richie Mo'unga for quite some time, but he's changed his mind. Razor is on now the same page as his boss, New Zealand Rugby CEO Mark Robinson. They've both been on a podcast together and they seem to be singing off the same hymn sheet and that they are quite happy, both of them, with the current arrangements. We'll go through what they are, what the flexibility is they were talking about and how that relates to Jordie Barrett. They talked about the South African model as well, and also a bit about Richie Mo'unga, who, as I mentioned, seems to be one of the main driving forces for Razor constantly asking New Zealand Rugby to keep an open mind. CEO Mark Robinson talked about the current policy, which doesn't allow for the selection of overseas-based All Blacks, namely in that it's an incentive for the top talent to remain here in New Zealand. This is obviously part of the reason they want to keep Super Rugby interesting, is to have the top players playing here in Super Rugby. Currently, Super Rugby is having a bloody good season, and I don't know that it would be at the same level as it currently is if a heap of these guys who we are seeing playing week in, week out were based overseas. So it's the incentive factor to keep the guys in New Zealand, and it is the incentive to keep Super Rugby strong. That's the main part. What is the cost of that? The cost of that is you are going to lose some players abroad. We've lost a number of players abroad in recent times. The likes of Shannon Frizzell, Richie Mo'unga were guys who you obviously would have liked to have seen stay at the end of the last World Cup cycle. And then you lose the fringe guys as well, which I actually think is maybe a kind of bigger cost to New Zealand Rugby in terms of depth, is that you lose guys who are maybe 1 or 2 cap All Blacks, or guys who don't even quite make the All Blacks but might have if they had stayed around. We've seen a number of guys do that. Harry Plummer is kind of the most recent example. He's not having his best season this year, but he did manage to play himself into the All Blacks with a bit of good time for the Blues. But he basically signed a contract at the end of the season to head to France because he said, Bodie's here and D-Mac are here. And he knew he's below them in the pecking order. And then all this talk about Richie Mo'unga potentially coming back, and the pursuit of Richie meant that even if they did ever get Richie back, then he was basically going to be out in the cold. So, yeah, it's a little bit of the price of the policy that you are going to lose guys like that. So you do lose a little bit of that depth. If the top guys go down, if the top guys take contracts overseas, that you don't necessarily have that, I want to say, third tier of player. But third tier players can become second or first tier players, right, if they are given enough opportunities. So that is going to be the cost. But both Razor and Mark Robertson talked up the flexibility of the current arrangements, because Razor said, look, he's had a year in the job as All Blacks coach to think about it. Remember, his previous stance was keep an open mind. He now says he's got a better understanding of the flexibility that there is within the current regulation, and he thinks it is fit for purpose. The main guy they referenced was Jordie Barrett, basically saying that he is a contracted All Black who will be available for the All Blacks later on in the year, but he's currently with Leinster, and Razor seems quite happy for the fact that, he's playing for a very good team over in Europe. He's getting coached by some of the best coaches in the world. Talked about Jacques Nienaber being, Jordie Barrett's coach, one of his coaches at the moment at Leinster. So the fact that Jordie Barrett is going to come back a better player than when he left is basically a win for the All Blacks. So that's the guy they gave as an example. To be fair, he's an exception, not the rule. Most of the All Blacks guys currently go to Japan and earn some money and maybe have a less intensive year than they would have had if they'd stayed in New Zealand for a year, and they certainly earn a fair bit more coin. So Jordie is the exception, but it did sound like they kind of would like more players to go down that route, and they are not ruling it out happening in the future. But there was still very much the mindset of you need to serve your time first. It's almost like a prison sentence the way they put it, but you need to do your time, and then you can be rewarded with a kind of sabbatical overseas to go earn some cash and maybe get a bit more overseas experience. But yeah, do your time, go away, and then come back. That is the message. Do your time is the kind of primary one. And Mark Robinson basically said that is what is best for New Zealand rugby. Now, when it comes to Mo'unga, they talked about how they did have kind of discussions with him at the end of the year. They talked a lot about it being speculation, but the fact that he's decided to stay in Japan means New Zealand need to move forward. So not hanging up any like a breakup. It's not anything to just pine for Richie to come back. It is it's time to let him go. He will be back in New Zealand potentially at some point in the future, but that's not where the focus lies at the moment. Despite Razor saying he still would like to have the best players available, he seems to be comfortable with the fact now that those players need to be based in New Zealand. They did bring up the South African model because South Africa, remember, under Rassie, they relaxed their previous model, which also required guys to be based in South Africa. They relaxed that to allow selection from anywhere. And they kind of said that that's what suits them, but doesn't necessarily suit New Zealand. Both places are potentially financially in different positions. I heard that and basically meant that they need Super Rugby to be strong, but I could just not be reading between the lines. I could have been missing something, but yeah, they need their guys to be in New Zealand, where South Africa can maybe afford to have guys based overseas, and their domestic competition continues to go well enough for them. So yeah, well, I guess what works for one doesn't necessarily work for the other. But yes, we will see. What do you guys reckon? Do you think they should relax the policy, or do you think it currently works as it is? Personally, I still am happy with the system as it is, because I do feel like if Super Rugby loses all the big gun players, then that may be the death blow. Super Rugby is only just really seemingly recovering from a number of lackluster years this year. Like this year, there's genuinely some hype, some excitement, and it seems to be finally having turned the corner and tracking in the right direction. If you didn't have the likes of your Talias, your Barretts, and all the other All Blacks guys, and fringe All Blacks guys from last year and whatnot playing, then Sever Reese and Will Jordan and whatnot doing what they're doing for the Crusaders. If you don't have these guys doing their thing, I'm not sure you get the same interest in the comp. But you guys let us know your thoughts. Do you think Razor has been kind of forced, or do you think he's just given up on Richie, given that Richie's staying in Japan? You guys take care, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.